Welcome to the Invero Show. Join the Invero team and our esteemed clients and partners as we demystify the complexities of Microsoft cloud systems. We hope to help you accelerate your cloud journey and maximize the value of your investment with Microsoft. And now, on with the show.
Hey, thanks everybody. Good morning to those in the West, and good afternoon to those in Central or East. We really appreciate you joining this episode of the Invero Show, where we are going to talk about Azure FinOps. We've had so much fun with these Invero shows. I think this is our 8th or 9th now, and it's a lot of fun for us to unpack topics that we've learned about, and we believe we've got some unique capability, and we feel that our client base or our prospective client base has real interest in. And overwhelmingly, this is a topic that we see over and over again of people having, I'll say, a bit of a struggle there of figuring it out. So we're really excited to share our learnings and just kind of have a good conversation here this afternoon or morning. So let's dive in. I've met many of you, but for those that I haven't met before, I'm Sean Ambrose, the CRO here at Invero and your Invero Show host, and I'm joined with Stephanie and Craig. Stephanie leads our Microsoft licensing practice, and Craig is our founder and CTO. And the two of them together have been our trailblazers in terms of all things FinOps, of understanding it from an architectural, technical point of view, kind of cross-reference around a licensing optimization, pulling out all that together into a comprehensive FinOps design thinking. So let's dive in. So what we're going to talk about today, I'm going to just kick this off here, just like I do in every Invero show, of just a little bit of positioning up front of why is this worth learning about? Why is it important? What's the relevancy? And I'll just quickly touch on how does it fit into what Invero does overall. Some of you there's a wide range of familiarity of Invero, so I'll just take 60 seconds and just tackle that. And then I'm going to pass it over to Craig to talk a little bit about what is FinOps and just unpack that and get a little deeper about it. And then Steph's going to join in here to talk through some different customer examples where they've been at and where we've helped them, and different sizes and different challenges they're having and different outcomes and successes. And then Steph will talk a little further about how you can get started. What can you do all on your own just to kind of make where are the quick wins? Where's that progress? And then we'll talk a little further about, if you want to go further in that, how could we help you achieve even more? So without further ado, let's jump into why is this worth learning about? And I think it's probably quite intuitive to all of you of getting that maximum value out of the platform. But let's go a little deeper here. And when I put this together, I thought it was kind of fun to say, well, Azure's awesome, right? So like, why do we even need to have this conversation? Like, Azure's fantastic. It offers you scalability, global reach, flexibility, security, integration, machine learning, AI, cost management, which really I'm saying you only pay for what you use. So that's great. DevOps support and integrating what your developers are doing into operations, and then this massive list of services that you can access through the Azure platform. That truly is awesome. It really is. However, there's a bit of a dark side or some challenges that we need to be mindful of here. So let's just think about that a little bit. What are those pervasive challenges that are showing up? Well, the cloud costs rise as adoption increases. That is not entirely bad. As I said on the left side, cost management is great that you only pay for what you use, but that kind of dark side that could spiral up really, really quickly. And it could kind of come out of nowhere, and maybe you didn't even have visibility to it. Services like AI are driving even greater adoption. That in and of itself is also not bad. That's fantastic. But it kind of goes back to that prior point but that could all of a sudden have services and consumption spiral up, and you might not have seen that coming or budgeted or prepared for that appropriately, or it just might not be right. Another one that kind of sits on both sides of the ledger is the good news is it's pretty easy for an organization to give access to many, many people to deploy services in there and build in Azure. But again, that dark side could be, well, all those people are doing different things. What's that visibility to it? Did I know what they did, or did they even know what impact they did? They spun up a certain service, and did they really understand if that was a $100 a month thing or a $10,000 a month thing? And how does that clarity and accountability come back to them? These are all kind of these dark side things just to figure out. And then the over provisioning of services. Sometimes services get built for kind of the maximum performance, and maybe that wasn't needed, or kind of an equal thing we see is just orphan services. Somebody built something at some point and it's not really being used anymore, but it's still hanging around and it's still a metered service and it's still costing money. licensing programs. This is a big part of Steph's expertise of just they're complicated and they're always changing. And so organizations have to stay on top of that to get to the best cost structure within their Azure environment. So all of this says like this is stuff to figure out, and it's not just an IT thing. It's kind of where IT meets financial management and overall operational efficiency. And the old way, Craig's going to talk about this a bunch more here shortly, of the kind of the old way in a CapEx model of, you spend some capital dollars, you understand what you're doing with that, and you amortize that. That's quite different now to this OpEx consumption. There's a whole bunch of benefit there, but it also, if you kind of go back to all those points above, it can create some lack of clarity or understanding of what's happening or about to happen, and then that can show up in your bill, and then it's difficult. So all this to say that Azure is awesome. Everything on the left is absolutely accurate. It is awesome, and it's really awesome when the things on the right are navigated effectively, so that ultimately you get that business value. Because when you get the business value, then it's fantastic. But if all those things on the right turn into runaways, then the business value gets a little diluted by inefficiencies. So that's kind of why we're here. Hopefully that's a version of why all of you have invested some time to learn about this today. So how does this fit into Invero's go-to-market? For those that are not familiar, Invero, our purpose, our mission is to help clients maximize the value of their investment in Microsoft. You see that kind of right here. That's what we wake up every day thinking about. Now, how do we go do that? Up on the top left here, it's what we do. We focus exclusively on Microsoft platform and complementary technologies, but we stay tight to that. And combined with that is our expert level Microsoft licensing practice, because we believe deeply that at every architectural consideration, there's an equal part licensing consideration to get that maximum value and optimization. So that is the DNA of Invero. And then everything else you see there is just kind of the technical areas of how we contribute to that from an architecture standpoint. So how does this conversation show up in what I've just described? Well, it certainly shows up here in Azure Core. It also shows up in the modernization and the automation and the efficiencies that you can get at an application level. Now we'll go to that Microsoft licensing area. It shows up in the strategy overall of Microsoft licensing, in cost optimization, in billing management, and then last but not least is kind of that wraparound of overall strategy and governance of the overall Azure environment. So that's just a bit of a connection point to Invero's go-to-market and how it fits in, and why this is such a big topic for us, because it fits into so many parts of what we do. So now I'm going to pass it over to Craig, who's going to start off with just talking about some of the top pain points for cloud management. So Craig, over to you here.
Thanks, Sean. Very good. So I'm going to assume everybody's got some familiarity with what FinOps is, but I'm going to definitely go into more details here for those who maybe don't. There's an organization called FinOps Foundation. They did a State of FinOps report. It was released earlier this year. And this is their view of what the top pain points are for managing cloud. And you can see a lot of it's around costs and cost optimization. The number one being actually getting your engineers to take action on cost optimization. So it may seem odd that there's a lot of tools that exist that are making recommendations. Here's some cost savings opportunities, reserved instances, what have you. But then actually carving out time or making it a priority for somebody on the admin team to actually execute and make those changes to achieve those cost optimization opportunities. So that is the number one challenge that companies face. But as I'll talk about on the next slides, FinOps is much more than just cost optimization. It gets into, as Sean talked about, the business value side of it as well. But if you look at just the top 5 things here, a lot of it's around cost. So accurate forecasting, automation to identify anomalies, those sort of things. But all of these things that are on screen here are really the top pain points for most companies when they're managing cloud. And if you go to the next slide, Sean, to kind of talk a bit more about what FinOps is and why it became important and where it ultimately derived from. So Sean kind of hinted at this about kind of comparing the old CapEx model to the new OpEx model in the cloud. But if you think back prior to cloud world, SaaS, pay for what you get, there would be a business justification process for any capital spend, any investment in technology. So the business first identifies a need. There's some sort of solution that's required that needs some technology. So the business goes to IT. IT is going to then select or approve the technology that's going to address that need. Then there's typically a finance or procurement within IT function that's going to look at, is this within budget? And then, a PO is cut, the technology is purchased, IT implements it, business will consume it, and IT will operate it. Now, this is a very oversimplified view, but this is kind of the steps if we compare this to the OpEx model, which this model, CapEx, was from a budgeting and forecasting perspective. More easily defined because if you just hit next, John, for the animation, because it's a capital spend that is depreciated over a fixed period of time. So it's a known spend. So say it's $1 million to implement this technology, amortized over 3 years. There's a known cost that's going to hit the income statement each month. So it's depreciated on an even amount. Next animation, John. Now, comparing that to the cloud and the OpEx model, where the business still identifies a need, they come to IT, IT is going to select or approve some technology. But now, with you could lay down a credit card and buy the technology, or in Azure, purchasing new resources through the Azure Marketplace, or just directly in the portal spinning up new resources. IT has the ability to literally click to buy and buy the technology, implement it, and now the business is consuming it, and IT will continue to operate it. And almost at the tail end of this is the finance and procurement function receiving the bill and trying to then scramble and figure out, well, geez, is this in the budget or it's not in budget? How do we deal with it? And because the costs are variable now, it's harder to predict, harder to get those forecasts and make sure that staying within budget, because somebody has access to spin up resources, that's now going to increase costs. So what's lacking here is that budget approval in the overarching process. Again, oversimplified, but this is really to highlight the value and the reason for FinOps, which is driving accountability at these different stages. So before technology is approved or selected, there's some sort of business case still being done of what is the cost going to be when this is up and running, making sure that when the technology is bought that it's in budget and those sort of things. So that's kind of comparing the old world to the new world scenario. So for those who aren't familiar with FinOps, it's much more than just cost optimization or cost management. The goal of FinOps is ultimately tracking cloud dollars that are spent to some sort of value or return on investment, and ultimately driving that accountability into the business functions or the actual consumers of the services to that value. So when a business case is put forward to implement a new solution and it's going to drive maybe more revenue or more productivity, reduce costs, that value is tracked and being able to attribute the cloud spend to the value that's being received. There's three primary pillars here of FinOps, really around driving visibility. So this is where cost management comes into play, as well as unit economics, which is driving specific value to each dollar spent. Optimization, this is not just cost optimization, it can also be around workload optimization, performance and cost tied to that, but making decisions based on data. So being able to then predict where the spend is going and where it makes sense to optimize. And underpinning all of this requires some level of governance. So some policies that are going to drive consistency and ensuring that accountability is there. One thing though to keep in mind, this is a new way of doing things, and it does require a cultural shift within an organization. So, the speed of the cloud, the ability to spin up resources, that is a huge benefit and allows for quicker turnaround and implementation of technology, but it comes at a cost of, being able to contain and stay within budget. So building overall FinOps processes and practices does require a cultural shift. So we prescribe to a company called or organization called FinOps Foundation. This is a not-for-profit organization. It's funded and all the big cloud providers participate in setting the policies and procedures within FinOps, this FinOps framework that they've developed. They also have a FinOps maturity framework as well for assessing where an organization is on their maturity level of FinOps. But if you look at the domains and capabilities section here that's highlighted, these are the 4 domains that FinOps Foundation prescribes and says are the keys to establishing FinOps. This is all public information. You can go to finops.org and access this. They've got great resources there. But we follow this methodology because it's industry proven and it works. So you can see the 2 outer piers there, or domains are around understanding the cost and optimizing the cost. That's where most people go when they think of FinOps in general. It's how do we get a handle on our costs, and then how do we reduce those costs by optimizing. But in between that is the value, business value. So being able to go down the path of planning and estimating. So when new workloads are spun up, where are they going to, who's ultimately responsible for that new spend, quantifying that business value back to the organization. Now, to underpin all of this, managing a FinOps practice, it can't be something that's just off to the side of somebody's desk. We get involved with a lot of clients who have these challenges where it's just assumed that the IT administrators are the ones that are going to act on cost recommendations, cost savings recommendations, but they've got busy day jobs as well. So it's important, depending on the size of your organization, but to at least carve out a role or a part of somebody's role that is responsible for FinOps. So this includes building some operating practices around how FinOps is going to be run, what governance and policies are in place. So, and then doing regular assessments to make sure that you're progressing towards maturity. In the bottom right there, the FinOps Foundation maps people's maturity, organization's maturity to kind of a crawl, walk, run state. And I'll talk a bit more about that in a few minutes here. Again, this is data from FinOps Foundation, their State of FinOps report, looking at what are the key priorities. So people that are FinOps practitioners, where do they see their best use and what are the most challenging things that they're facing today and that they want to prioritize? The top 2, 3 there are reducing waste, managing commitment, and accurate forecasting. That's really around cost management. But then you get to the 4th one there, and the allocation of cloud spending. That is a challenge for a lot of organizations to try to grapple, because typically cloud spend, let's just focus on Azure at this point. And if we, there's obviously SaaS costs and so on that do factor into this. But let's just say in Azure, costs are typically just a single line item in an IT budget. So when the IT department gets challenged of what is that spend going towards, it becomes very difficult to explain back to the business. And especially if that cost is rising over time, it gets even more and more challenging. So that 4th priority there is around being able to allocate the costs, not necessarily in a chargeback model. It doesn't have to go to that extent, but at least being able to attribute and show where those costs are who's consuming those cloud resources and what the business value is that's being driven out of that.
We thought it'd be helpful just to go through some things we've been seeing and just some scenarios, match them up to some of the spend categories and just kind of go through where to get started, how we've been helping some of these customers. So the first one, it's a pretty small environment. And the biggest challenge that this customer had was really the small IT team that was supporting their entire environment. It's a really stable Azure tenant and it's really predictable costs, but it was really being managed by one person. And so he didn't even create the environment himself, he inherited it. And so that led to just some challenges with understanding what was in there, what his costs should be. So we did a little bit of training, a bit of a maturity assessment just to figure out where we thought and where this customer thought they really needed to focus to beef up their FinOps practice internally, I did a cost optimization review, and we actually have a little ongoing service with this customer where I manage a lot of that busy work that is associated with the FinOps practice. And so just as the example here, this customer with their just over $20,000 a month of spend, through utilizing some of those programs, reservations, AHub, we've reduced their cost by about 20%, but I've also set them up with good reporting. And so supplying that monthly reporting to really enable that visibility into what is in the environment has been really helpful for budgeting and the procurement team and really just understanding their cloud costs. So that's what we're doing with a pretty small customer that has just a little Azure environment that's very stable. When we're going to talk about some of the bigger customers, the next customer example with a bigger environment, they were actually already a lot more aware of some of the principles and domains of FinOps than the previous example. And their challenge was really trying to find the time to they already put a lot of the cost optimizations in place, but nobody was keeping an eye on it and nobody was tracking what they had going on in Azure. This customer actually referred to their environment as the wild, wild west. Their governance was not where it should be. There was too many people with access. They weren't really treating FinOps as a continual process. So what we did for this little bit larger of a customer, the first thing, this was more of a point in time review that we did with them. So it was a cost optimization assessment. I reviewed all their Azure spend. I reviewed what they already had in place. And honestly, their reservations were not very well utilized. So they were actually wasting about $2,000 every single month just on reservations that weren't picking up virtual machines. So through that cost optimization assessment, we ended up showing how to save them about 14% in costs on their Azure environment. Not a huge amount, but considering they already had a lot of these things in place, it was a pretty good little savings for them. And then we also reviewed some of their M365 licensing for optimizations and showed them how to reduce some of that count just through cleaning up the wasted licenses that weren't properly assigned to users, flipping around some of those bundles. And so the goal here was really, it was a cost savings exercise, but all of that cost that we showed them how to save, they were going to use that to fund the next few phases of their FinOps journey. And what I mean by that is really the next few phases were around some of that Azure governance that they needed to put in place, tagging, and they needed some extra tools and licensing in there to be able to lock down the access, things like PIM and PAM. So we were able to show them how to save some money to really fund the next few phases of this project. And then we've also been working with a couple of larger customers as well. So in talking about some of the larger environments, this one example, they were actually doing quite well with the cost optimization side of things. And their spend is a few $1,000,000 a year. And the one person that was solely responsible for managing their internal FinOps practice was doing a great job. He ended up finding over $1,000,000 of savings every year just on some of these reservations and pre-purchase plans and all of these cost savings programs that don't actually make you change any of your architecture. They're just there to save some money. But where they were really struggling was the internal FinOps practice itself. And so this is more of a true traditional FinOps engagement where the whole goal was to improve the processes and the maturity of that team internally and enable that cultural change of the whole organization. So what we've been doing with this large organization is a lot more workshops and some conversations and surveys to dig in a lot of where are you now? Where do you want to go? What's really important to the organization? And so as we kind of look at all these examples and we talk about the maturity levels of crawl, walk, run, it's important to understand that not every organization should be at that run level. It's going to be important to do that digging and to really understand what your goals are, and just how to increase your internal FinOps practice. And so for some customers, it is just really important to understand how to save some money and then how to take that to the next steps. With that being said, let's talk about how you can get started on your FinOps journey. So FinOps it's not a point in time exercise. There's definitely some value in point in time reviews, but it should be an ongoing practice internally, an ongoing idea. It does involve a lot of just people and involvement in your environment. It's that whole idea of when is the best time to plant a tree? 30 years ago. When's the second best? Right now. So the best time to start your FinOps? Right when you start in Azure. But for a lot of customers that are well down that path, the best time to really beef up your FinOps is now. So some of the best places, if you're really at that starting point initially in your Azure journey, I would say the most important thing is to understand what your current costs are and understand your current resources that you have in Azure. So what's your spend? What are those trends? Is it a pretty stable environment? Do you have an upwards trajectory? What are your expected costs? All of these things are very important to figure out. It's really hard to identify where you need to go if you don't have a good handle on what the problem statement is really going to be. The other super important thing to building a FinOps practice internally is to identify who should be involved. There are a lot of personas that should be involved in a FinOps practice. A really important part is that executive sponsor and the executive buy-in. If you're going to go really deep into FinOps, it's going to take an investment in resources, in time. And so in order to get past that, I'm just doing this from the side of my desk. I'm just going to do this in my spare time. If the goal is to really focus on your cloud spend and that FinOps practice, you need executive sponsorship. You need to identify some of those roles, procurement and finance and engineering, that really need to be involved in making sure it's a successful practice. The other key ingredient here when you're identifying all these roles is to really think about what do those roles need from a data and reporting perspective to understand and to take ownership for their role in FinOps and cloud spend. Do you need to meet monthly to review the trends? If you have a very dynamic environment, you're going through a migration, that could absolutely be helpful is to have very regular cadence as you build this. If you have a stable environment, not much access, not much is happening, then perhaps you don't need to meet with that kind of frequency. It really depends on where you are, like I said, in that FinOps journey. But another really important thing, especially starting out, is some guardrails in place. And what I mean by that is the budgeting and alerts that you can put in place in Azure. And so the concern here is if somebody spins something up, if one of your burstable services takes off, there's all these scenarios where your costs can really explode. I think it's going to be helpful to give some thought to how long will it take for you to notice if something like that starts to just take off? Is it when you get your next invoice? Will you notice it within a few days? Who's going to notice it? And what kind of steps should you take to correct it? And so setting up some of those alerts for spend, setting up your budgeting, really being aware of what you think that should be and should look like is going to be very helpful for maintaining and containing costs. And then the most exciting part of FinOps, and my favorite part, is definitely those cost optimizations. And that needs to be involved pretty early on, just to really get some excitement and get some traction going. If all you're going to do is create this practice that's going to be a cost suck on your Azure, even more so than some of this cloud spend that's taking up resources, it's going to be tough to get off the ground internally. It's going to be very helpful to get excitement and involvement when you can show, okay, we actually know how to save a bunch of money, so let's start with some cost optimizations. So those are just some just general and easy ways to get started and get people involved internally. And I've already kind of mentioned that there are definitely some tools to take into account. So what are the tools out there that's going to help get things going? There are some really great built-in and included tools. And so there's a couple of screen grabs here. These are just publicly available screen grabs. I stole them from the internet. These are not customer information, but the top one is the Azure cost management part of that Azure portal. The bottom one is a view from Azure Advisor. These are the two built-in tools that are a great starting point if you're not already using them. The Azure cost management, that's going to be kind of your starting point for slicing and dicing and understanding your current costs. It's a great little spot where you can filter things and change the viewpoints, download all those reports. It's going to be really great for showing trends. You can look into cost by subscription, cost by tagging, all of those kinds of things. And the next one is the Azure Advisor, and there's actually some really interesting things that keep getting added into Azure Advisor as well. So I feel like there is a bit of a love-hate relationship that a lot of customers have with Azure Advisor. A lot of people love to hate it. There is a lot of confusion that comes in. There's definitely some changes that have just happened where you no longer see those aggregated spend totals, because that was throwing off a lot of people. I know when you popped in there and it's like, save this much money a year, but a lot of them would overlap and it would just not be nearly as exciting as everyone hoped with those totals. But there are things being added in all the time. There's a cost optimization workbook in there. There's a service retirement workbook. I highly recommend popping in there regularly. Microsoft likes to retire Azure services on the regular, and there is a big group of retirements coming next September. I see all the time affected resources just popping in there. So really take a look at that Azure Advisor as well as an included built-in tool. Now, there are tons of other third-party tools, some free, some are very expensive. There is, when you pop over to GitHub, there are things like orphan resource workbooks that you can download. There's a great FinOps toolkit. And actually, when you look in there, the list of contributors, there's almost 60 contributors to some of these toolkits. So this is definitely an area of focus. And a lot of people are really just sharing what they're coming up with to make life easier for everybody. Power BI dashboards where you can connect your Azure cost management, and that was just a nice user-friendly way to display that data and just manipulate it in a little bit different way for users that are really comfortable with those Power BI dashboards. I will mention it depends on what kind of an Azure consumption agreement you have as to how some of these tools will interact in your environment. It's a little different for CSP customers, for example, versus direct agreements like on an MCA. So if you have any questions about how those tools work, what would apply to you, how to use them, feel free to reach out. I'm happy to walk you through as much as I know about them. And then again, there's a ton of third-party tools. I was just this morning on reading an article about the 10 best free third-party tools out there. A lot of these big, beefy, expensive tools will have a free tier, or there will be like a little free tool for a very specific cost review like Kubernetes or something like that. One thing I will point out, if you're not really sure what kind of a tool you need, chances are you're not quite ready for any tool. I think by the time you get to that spend where you're going to spend significant amount of money on a tool to help you, you should already be pretty far down the path and really have identified what you're looking for in a tool, what some of the gaps that your FinOps practice needs complemented with some of these tools, because there's a ton out there and they can be wildly expensive. The last piece, so Craig's already mentioned FinOps Foundation. We love FinOps Foundation. There's actually a free little intro course on their site. It's only about an hour and a half long. And that's a great way to just get more familiar with some of these domains and concepts around FinOps. And then there are some more courses that are paid above and beyond that. I'm doing one right now. So there's some great resources out there for free, a ton where you pay for them. But again, take advantage of the free ones to start out with. Really dig in to identify what your requirements are before jumping into some of those expensive ones. And then this is my favorite topic, but what are some ways and some quick wins for cost optimizations? I'd say I might need to redefine quick and what that means to me. Some of these aren't super quick, but these are pretty impactful and I'd say low effort kind of reviews or ways to get started with just some cost optimizations. So as a licensing specialist, Azure Hybrid Benefit is near and dear to my heart, but really optimizing your virtual machines, that is typically just the easiest, most low-hanging fruit for saving a whole bunch of money. When we look at the cost on a pay-go model for just that compute and the licensing for your virtual machines, throwing in reservation savings plans and then optimizing the spend on your licensing, you could save 50, 60, 80% on your virtual machines. It's hugely impactful and not that difficult to navigate. Reservations and savings plans can be a bit complicated, but for sure, I'm always happy to help answer questions and review virtual machine spend. Another easy way to just kind of clean up your environment, like I mentioned, there is a workbook that you can find on GitHub that will identify orphaned objects. There's some native tools. Azure Advisor will also point out unattached disk. Take a quick look at that. Usually it's a little bit of spend. It's not hugely impactful, but just cleaning up your environment can be just really nice and helpful. So the next one, the next suggestion is really to figure out where your spend lies and focus on the highest spend items in your environment to start researching some of these cost savings programs. So there are a ton of programs, pre-purchase plans. There's reservations out there for a number of services outside of virtual machines, app service, and Cosmos DBs and managed SQL and all of these other areas where there are some good cost savings programs in there. It just takes a bit of time and research, but if you understand what your top spend categories are, it's just going to make it so much faster to take a look at what's available and what would fit into your environment. I mentioned Azure Advisor. Like I said, customers seem to love and hate it usually all at the same time. I don't recommend that Azure Advisor that you just blindly go in there and take all of their recommendations, but for sure, it can be a good place to get some hints. It will help point out just some of those cost savings opportunities that are available. It could point out some services that you might not be aware of that would qualify for reservations. So pop in there, take a little look, get some hints, and it's a good place to really get started on some cost optimization. The last thing I'll point out is there are definitely, as Microsoft comes out with these newer generations and these updated services, a lot of the time you'll find that the newer version is both more cost effective and it actually is more powerful. It can include more CPU, things like that. It's going to be more efficient. It's going to run better and it'll overall be cheaper. So take a look when new things are being released and just see what's available to upgrade in your environment. A great example of this is app service. And so on the premium tier of app service, for the V2, for example, reservations are not available. But if you were to upgrade some of those premium app services that you have in your environment to V3, not only is it a 16% overall cost savings just on those newer versions, but you could also throw a reservation onto it that's only available in that newest generation. And so so you're going to get better performance, you're going to throw a reservation on there, and overall, if with a 3-year reservation, you can save 50% over that V2 premium version. So those are a couple ways to get started with some cost optimizations. I am pretty excited about this side of the FinOps. So if you have any questions, you want some tips, feel free to reach out and I will talk your ear off for days.
Thanks, Steph. This has been great overview here of the quick wins. We're going to transition. We're kind of in the last leg of our messaging here, and we're going to just chat. Craig's going to chat a little bit about how can Invero help. And we've talked a lot about how you can help yourself and how we can co-help you along the way. And so Craig's just going to take that a little further to kind of the different stage gates that you may be in or try and aspire to, and how we're helping different customers. So Craig, back over to you here.
Perfect. Thank you. And thanks, Steph. Your passion definitely comes out. So saving customers money is always good. So some great suggestions there from Steph. There's obviously lots that we've covered, lots of things that need to be considered. And again, it's not just about cost savings, but that is kind of ultimately where all the efforts are focused on, how to maximize the value that you're getting out of your cloud spend. So we introduced the concept of crawl, walk, run. This is following the foundation maturity model. Like many things in life, you have to crawl before you can walk and walk before you can run. Many organizations are not going to strive for a run. It's just too much overkill. There's too much overhead, so on and so forth, and it's not necessary. You get potentially a diminishing returns the more, but you require more investment to get there. But in the same respect, you can't just say, okay, we want to go to run or walk and just jump straight there. You have to first kind of get some of the foundational pieces in. And many companies we talk to aren't even ready for crawl. They're just trying to, get a handle on what they currently have. And but how FinOps Foundation defines the crawl stage, which is where many of you probably are thinking, okay, how do I get started? This is where you're really looking at, getting your reporting in place so you can properly understand where your cloud spend is going. Some of this is tied to tagging, building a tagging policy and process so that resources are getting the appropriate tags, so when you're running reports, like Steph was showing some of the Azure cost management reports and so on, you can then filter out and look at specific application types or departments or whatever makes sense for your organization. Getting those pieces in place and then building some basic KPIs around those to be able to measure what does good look like. So ultimately, that's the low-hanging fruit side of things, and cost savings. A lot of the opportunities that Steph just highlighted, that will come out of this crawl stage. And if you're looking to get serious about this, FinOps Foundation defines the kind of maturity level at the crawl stage of focusing on cost savings, of course, being able to allocate at least 50% of the cloud spend. So thinking about all your cloud costs, being able to identify more than half of that being attributed to different parts of the business, and ultimately what the value is driven out of that may not be part of that allocation, but at least a conversation can be had and known where X dollars is spent and who's accountable for driving that spend or keeping it within control. Then also being able to say with confidence that you've got over 60% of the resources under some sort of reserve instance or savings plan. So being able to know that you're on top of the majority of what you have in the environment with maximizing the savings that are available from all the big cloud providers. Forecasting is a big part of getting to crawl, and this is where a lot of companies struggle. Being able to forecast that spend and knowing when new resources are added, what the impact is going to be there. So to get to crawl, FinOps Foundation defines it as being able to have a maximum variance of 20% in your forecast. So you've got forecasts out to the rest of the year, coming within 20% of that. And that may seem daunting, but ultimately that is why you start at crawl, because to get there, you have now all of the underpinning foundational pieces that are required to then further mature and move things forward. I won't drain the slide on the other characteristics. It's really just refining, getting tighter and tighter on those areas. How do you define what needs to be done to get to those different maturity levels? So here at Invero, we've actually taken the maturity model from FinOps Foundation and built an assessment tool to determine where you are and quantify where you are on the spectrum today between crawl and run, and then where you want to go. So as I said, not many organizations are going to strive for full run, 100%. You're going to get there, but somewhere in between. So this is a dashboard that our FinOps Ready assessment provides, and you can see it quantifiable there on the top left. That this particular sample is, in between crawl and walk, currently rating at 1.5 out of 5, but the customer wants to get to 3.9. So now that is great, but how do you close that gap? So then we dive into each of the pillars around cost management, cost optimization, business value, and FinOps practice. And we quantify where they're at today, where they want to go in each of those pillars. And then we do that gap analysis and provide detailed recommendations with actionable items that you can execute on to close that gap and slowly mature your FinOps practices over time. So this is one way we can help, is give you a current state assessment. FinOps Foundation recommends actually assessing your maturity on a regular basis so you can track that progress over time, and we have that ability built into our tool to give you that visibility of, okay, where are we maturing, where do we maybe want to focus some more energy. So we can do that. So this is our one pager. We're happy to chat with you further about the FinOps Ready assessment. It's a simple engagement. We can do it in very short order to be able to get you set up for success to achieve, if you're at crawl today, going to walk, or if you're not even at crawl, you're pre-crawl, you want to figure out where the gaps are. We can help kind of pinpoint that and help you identify the areas to focus on. That may still be not enough for some of you. You may think that you don't have the time or the people with the skills or available to tackle this internally. So we have here at Invero FinOps as a service offering with 3 levels: bronze, silver, gold. And this follows the FinOps Foundation, again, domains and capabilities, where bronze is really focused on understanding your current costs and very basic application of rate optimization and licensing optimization around using RIs, savings plans, so on, identifying those. For our customers that are on our CSP, we offer bronze FinOps as a service included, bundled with that CSP service, but it is available if you aren't on CSP, or if you're not with our CSP, we can engage that. And that'll give you the kind of base level understanding around your costs and being able to predict, or not predict, sorry, because forecasting is part of silver, but being able to keep things under control. If you need a little bit more than that, silver includes forecasting and budgeting and being able to track that and identify where you're going to land, as well as workload optimization. So being able to, some of those recommendations Steph pointed out that are available in Azure Advisor or whatever, we actually go deeper than that. We're going to look at your workloads, performance optimization, cost optimization, and help make those recommendations and work with you to achieve those. And silver also includes some of the base level components of building out your FinOps practice, and we offer that. We take that on as part of the service, so you're not having to staff up and start building the FinOps practice yourself. That's where I think most customers are comfortable, and that gets them at least to the walk stage and gets them what they need. But then some customers want to go even further and go full-blown FinOps and outsource that. That's where we offer the gold service, and that's benchmarking, unit economics, much more detailed tagging and resource planning as workloads are onboarded. There's a process that we would insert into your environment where we would be able to help guide when workloads are coming online, what the costs are going to be, what the implications are. Maybe the architecture could be optimized before it goes into production to ensure cost savings are built into the plan, that sort of thing. So there's 3 flavors there. If you want to completely outsource the FinOps function, it's because we have economies of scale, we can offer this at less than the cost of you hiring a full-time person to do this. So that's kind of the value we have out of this FinOps as a service. So of those top pain points that companies face with cloud management, FinOps as a service addresses, you can see about half of them, and of the top 5, 4 are addressed with the FinOps as a service. So just want to highlight that. Thanks, Sean.
Thanks so much, Craig. And to our audience, thanks so much for investing the time with us here. We're grateful for it. We hope that you got a nugget or 2 of value out of it. Yeah, thanks Kyle, so much. We hope you got great value. We clean up this recording and we post it on our website. So if you want to refer to it later, it's there. Our intention was to bring you a whole bunch of value and a whole bunch of nuggets that you can action yourselves, and then also a little bit of information to say, here's how Invero can help. My view is it starts with a conversation. Like, we would love to just have a conversation with you. We're quite willing to invest in some pre-sales to help you get the ball rolling. And if it turns into something more, it turns into something more. And if it doesn't, that's okay too. This is a topic that we're really passionate about. We love helping our customers. We love helping them be more efficient, help them save money, and ultimately helping them get the most out of that platform of Azure. So all the way back to that first slide I talked about of all those awesome things, how do you get that without the dark side, right? So with that, thank you again.